Hopefully I've got enough light under the bridge here to do this. It is 1933. So it's evening. So, quick rundown of what I've done to the DR since I got it. Okay, first the obvious. I put a sheepskin cover on it, just tied down with paracord to make it easier to ride it 100 miles at a time. I do intend to put a better seat on it one of these days. I put a Cycle Rack's rear rack on it and a pair of cheap pannier racks. I actually put the pannier racks on it first, and I've been so pleased with the cycle racks on my TWs that I decided to get one for this too, even though they're not common on DRs. Most of the DR guys don't seem to trust them. They think they'll be too big. But I know from riding one on a TW that it really doesn't get in the way. Of course, I put one of these gas cans on it. So, it's a cheap knockoff. $38, I think, for the can and the mount, which that's not exactly what you would call cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than the name brand. Okay, moving forward, of course I put a RAM mount on it for my phone. I do that on pretty much everything. Alright, now to the nitty gritty. Apparently all new DRs, regardless of which state they're going to, all new ones in the United States anyway, are shipped with California spec equipment, which means they have the air injection system and they have the carbon canister system. Now the carbon canister mounted back here under the rear cover, and it's got a bunch of hoses. It's got I guess it's got a connection to the vacuum line, and it's got a connection to the tank vent, which on this, the tank vent is not through the cap, but through the hose that goes out the bottom, and there's an assembly inside that goes up to the top of the tank on the inside. And apparently the non-California version did not have that. It had it vented through the cap somehow, or somewhere up here anyway. I'm not 100% sure, but I have read that it did not have the internal thing, because the internal thing actually reduces the capacity of the gas tank a little bit. So otherwise the same gas tank. So, bunch of junk, and there was a valve down here somewhere that was part of it. And then the air injection, it had a bunch of hoses. It had a big valve right here on the side of the frame, and it had a steel tube that crossed over the front of the cylinder and connected into the head. And you can probably see those two screws. So what I did was I removed all that completely. The valves, the hoses, and everything. And I removed that steel tube, and I cut out my own blank plate, block-off plate, because all it is, it goes into the exhaust port, and it's just a hole. So I traced around the part that bolted on it that had the tube coming out. I traced around that on a piece of steel and marked for the two holes, drilled them, then cut it out on my bandsaw, and hit it a few strokes with a file to smooth it and, you know, take any sharp edges off, and then put it on there with the original gasket. Worked fine. Did away with the charcoal canister and everything, and so now the only hose is coming from the bottom of the tank down to right here. So that's the tank vent. Works fine, no problem. And even if you lay it down, it doesn't leak more than maybe a few drops. Don't ask me how I know that. Another thing that it had that I really did not like was vacuum controlled petcock, fuel petcock. So it had 3 positions. All right. It had on one side, reserve on the other side, which most of them have, but then the center position was prime instead of being off like it is on a standard one. So what happened was you left it on, you know, and when it sensed engine vacuum, it would open, and when the vacuum went away, it would close. And if you didn't have fuel in the bowl of the carburetor, then you would have to put it in the center position, and excuse me, in the center prime position, and so it would allow fuel to flow without having that vacuum. Now, some people have had problems with that. I've got a problem with it right from the get-go, because for one thing, it's a bunch of unnecessary clutter that you don't need. Things to go wrong. I don't like things like that. For the other thing is, it will train you to leave your petcock in the on position. I don't need to be trained that way, because I've got other motorcycles that have regular manually operated petcocks. And for all of my riding life, I've trained myself to remember to turn it on and turn it off. And so I don't need something training me to do otherwise. So I removed that, and at that point I no longer had a need for the vacuum fitting on the carburetor. It's on the top, by the way. So I blocked that. I actually used a short section of vacuum line with a plug cut out of a wooden stick shoved in it. So that's working fine. And I replaced it with a standard manual petcock. Put it in the center, and it's off. And so far that's working perfectly. I would have expected no less. Alright, one more thing. I rode it home from the shop when I bought it, and I noticed that it was really flat off idle. So when I took the carburetor off to look at it and, you know, see what size jet it's got in it, and just basically go through it. Of course, like all new stuff, it had a plug over the air fuel mixture screw. So I drilled and pulled that plug, and what I discovered when I did that was the fuel air mixture was snugged all the way down on its seat. Pardon me. So that means that it was getting no fuel at idle to speak of. So anyway, I adjusted it the way it should be adjusted, and it ran 100% better. I also pulled the top off, and this is my CUNY CV carburetor, and so I pulled the top off, pulled out the slide and the needle, and put a shim under the needle to give it a bit more mid-range fuel. And it still got the original main jet. I'm going to do a little bit more tuning and get it just right. And part of that may be changing the main jet. Probably will be. Probably will include that. But we'll see. Oh, and on top of the air box, what just about everybody does is, at the least, take the, there's a rubber snorkel under there, and it's recommended to at least remove that because it blocks flow on the top end. So I did that, and some people go ahead and drill out the lid of the air box so it can flow more, and they say that it doesn't make it very much more susceptible to water ingress. And I'm going to ride this mostly on pavement and gravel, stuff like that, but not serious off-road anyway. So I might be crossing some creeks, but probably not any deep ones, because I'll use the TW for the more extreme stuff like that. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention, I'm doing this on a different day and using a different camera actually. But another thing that I did almost immediately after getting this back was the front, the counter sprocket, front sprocket. Factory was a 15 tooth, and I swapped that out for a 14 tooth to give me a little bit better first gear, which first gear is pretty high on these anyway, and even with the 14 tooth it's too high. It's higher than I like, but the 14 tooth helps a little bit, and it gives it a little better acceleration too, while still being able to go cruise at 70 with no problem and have a top speed of well in excess of the speed limit, and close to 100 miles per hour. So anyway, thanks for watching.